I have been telling you about the economic storm that is making its way to our shores. From Europe, where the debt crisis blowback could hit America at hurricane strength. From Asia, where growth engines like China and India are stalling in the wake of fewer exports to the West. And from Washington, where scorched earth partisan politics could push America over a fiscal cliff if Congress doesn't act. Legislation needs to be passed now to head off a series of tax increases and spending cuts that are mandated to take effect on January 1st because Congress couldn't come up with a proper deal to raise the nation's debt limit last year. So that's the ridiculous compromise they came up with. If Congress doesn't act before the elections, it may be too late to fight off the economic storm. You heard it from Mohammed Al-Arian, a 30% chance of a recession, he says. So frankly, after listening to me saying this endlessly, even I'm starting to think I'm full of hot air. So I'm going to give you 3 specific things that Congress can and must do now to address the coming economic storm. First, head off that so-called sequester, the $1 trillion of automatic across-the-board spending cuts that are mandated by Congress. The ridiculously named sequester legislation was passed as part of last August's debt ceiling extension, which followed, as you recall but would like to forget, intense partisan blackmail by both sides that nearly shut the government down and led to a downgrade of the United States credit rating. A stupid name for a stupid thing that could hurl the U.S. headlong back into recession. So solve it, Congress. Second, all right, we're going to look at another debt ceiling extension early next year. So what say we all get together ahead of time and act on it before the election, before Washington gets tempted to take America back to the brink a second time. And finally, third, negotiate another agreement on whether to extend the Bush-era tax cuts and adjust the alternative minimum tax to avoid slapping Americans with a higher tax bill next year. These are 3 simple things that Congress can do now. 3 things Washington needs to do before the elections to avoid falling over that fiscal cliff in January. If politicians in Congress put off the work that needs to be done, let them be held accountable for the next recession. An economic storm is headed our way. I've given you the proof, but you're demanding to know how we got here in the first place. I'm Ali Velshi. Welcome to Your Money. And as long as your politicians don't tell you the truth about our economy, I will. Slowdowns in Europe and Asia are creating economic headwinds that are strong enough to blow us into another recession. That's where we are today, but I'm so caught up in avoiding this recession that some of you think I'm not paying enough attention to how we got here. And you may be right, because we've got limited time and we need solutions. And right now, those solutions, many of them, lie with Congress. But there are causes, and there are many of them. A simple answer would be the cleanest, the most convenient. It's out-of-control deficits, or it's stimulus. It's Barack Obama or it's George W. Bush, but it's just not that simple. It's not that satisfying. One cause, however, does stand out amongst many: cheap and ample credit. For years, the ability of almost every working American to access more credit than they should have been able to masked the underlying fact that lower and middle class incomes were not rising. People felt, and in many cases actually were, wealthier than their salaries or their socioeconomic status would suggest. Getting a loan and buying a house, often more house than you needed or would have even expected to buy, made you feel wealthier. As more people bought those houses, your net worth increased. You borrowed against that house, maybe. Maybe you put your kids through college with the money. Maybe you bought another house, or you financed a small business. Maybe there wasn't even a house involved. Maybe you did all of those things on low-interest credit cards or other kinds of loans, but it doesn't really matter because generally economies were strong and you had a job. Even if the job wasn't getting much better and your wage generally wasn't growing, you were, for all intents and purposes, getting more prosperous. And because of that, you weren't complaining. Cheap and ample credit masked a lot of problems, the most serious of which was that income inequality was growing. But until the house got blown down, there was no class war. There was no 99%. There were no protesters in the streets. Politicians and policymakers didn't have to address the underlying reasons for the trend. Seriously, why fix something that no one thought was broken? Easy credit means that while India was focused on educating workers, the U.S. was falling behind. While China was building world-class infrastructure, the U.S. was crumbling. While Germany was establishing itself as the factory floor of the Western world, the U.S. was losing ground. We already had a consumption-based economy. We just made it bigger. People felt good. They kept up with, and in some cases, overtook the Joneses.